Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible with the usual crew. Good morning, everyone. Anybody got any opening comments?
Good morning, and yes, I do have one. So tomorrow being St. Patrick's Day, so St. Patrick's Day being the traditional death date of St. Patrick, so let's all take a drink for the guy who converted Ireland, but actually no, not really, because that was a different guy whose name was Palladius, and there's a very interesting problem with trying to figure out if Palladius and Patrick were actually the same person or not. So yeah, there's a lot of questions surrounding that. If anyone's interested in going down the rabbit hole.
In fairness, the legend about him driving the snakes out of Ireland is pretty universally understood to mean, killing off the pagans. So here's to Catholic genocide.
Right,
Everybody
yeah. Which he also didn't do. Like, he didn't drive out the pagans. There were still very much pagans in Ireland.
Oh, I'm sure there were definitely.
What Lawrence
pagans.
is trying to say is watch his video on this subject.
That's what I'm trying to say. Go watch my video on St. Patrick. Thank you.
Makes sense.
All right, so we are doing Joshua 19.
Yes.
Who is reading? Yeah, welcome back, Mark. Did we have you on last week?
Yeah, last week.
Missing.
We were on a road trip, kind of across America for a little bit. So I'm glad to be back. We got back in last night. So
Wow. Okay, where'd you go?
we made it all the way to Gatlinburg in Tennessee.
Huh.
Yeah. But
Okay.
we stopped at Nashville, Memphis, and other little towns here and there. Arkansas, Hot Springs. So we were busy. We even got a visitor, a bear.
Mark, you're cutting in and out a little. You might want to check your noise reduction. I think it's turned up a bit too high. If you lean back, it kills your volume.
To read, but I guess not. Yeah. So who's reading today?
Isaac volunteered.
This is a very long chapter. Should I break it up?
Yeah, I already broke it up. 23.
Don't do that. I just told Mark to fix that. So don't do that. Don't break it up. Just do it in the normal volume.
Okay. Go. Oh. All right. Chapter 19. The second lot fell to Simeon. The portion of the tribe of the Simeonites by their clans lay inside the portion of the Judahites. Their portions comprised Beersheba, which is or Sheva or An Sheva, depending on your translation. Molada, Chatza Shoal, Bala, Etzem, El Tolad, Bethel, Chorma, Siklag, Bet Hamar Kavot.
What is it, Aaron? Wait a minute. What is it, Aaron?
Yes.
Go on, tell the class.
Yeah. Hazar, Bala, El Tolad. You know, I'm just getting different pronunciations than he is.
Yeah. That's Chatzav Susa, Bet Levaot, Sharochen, Ayin, Rimon, Ether, or
wait.
Like the one that sounds like Ether.
You skipped you skipped a part. 13 towns with the villages.
Oh right, yeah, I'm just reading the names. Yeah, 13 towns with their villages. Ayin, Rimon, Ether, Ashan, 4 towns with their villages, together with all the villages in the vicinity of these towns, down to Ba'alath Be'er and Ramat Negev. That was the portion of the tribes of the Simeonites by their clans. The portion of the Simeonites was part of the territory of the Judahites, since the share of the Judahites was larger than they needed. The Simeonites received a portion inside their portion. The third lot emerged for the Zebulunites by their clans. The boundary of their portion, starting at Sarid, their boundary ascended westward to Maralah, touching Dabashet and touching the Wadi alongside Yokneam. And it also ran from Sarid along the eastern side where the sun rises, past the territory of Kitlof Tavar and onto Davrath, and ascended to Yafia. From there, it ran back to the east towards the sunrise to Gath Hefer, to Eth Katzin, and onto Rimon, where it curves to Ne'ah. Then it turned, that is the boundary on the north, to Chanathon. Its extreme limits were the valley of Yiftach El, Kataf, Nahalal, Shimron, Yid'alah, and Bethlehem. 12 towns with their villages. That was the portion of the Zebulunites by their clans, those towns with their villages. The fourth lot fell to Issachar. The Issacharites by their clans Their territory comprised Yisraelah or Yisrael, Kesulot, Shunem, Chafaraim, Shion, Anachorath, Rabith,
Anacharat.
What did I say?
Anochorat.
Oh,
I would
Anachorath.
just love to hear these read out.
That's
in
four.
Arkansas church.
It's 4 R's in a row.
Yes.
But if you were to read it with like any other accent besides a modern one, then it would be Anocharath. So it's 3 different vowels, but they're all pronounced the same in modern Hebrew. Anacharath, Rabith, Kishon, Avet, Remeth, En Ganim, En Chada, and Beth Patzet. That's a nice word. Doesn't it, Patzet, mean like explosion?
In modern Hebrew, it means explosion.
Oh, okay. Interesting. The boundary touched Tavar, Shachatzima, and Beth Shemesh, and their boundary ran to the Jordan, 16 towns with their village. That was the portion of the tribe of the Issacharites by their clans, the towns with their villages. So we'll stop here, yeah?
Yes.
Cool.
Is
You have
everyone still
commentary?
awake in the chat?
Yeah.
Because if you're still
Yeah.
talking about action figures, I was saying beforehand, I want mine standing on the head of my foes.
Yeah.
And
The only
probably going to
interesting bit
fail.
about this part is the Simeonite towns are inside the portion of Judah.
That
which
is
is-
interesting.
Yeah, it's like all of the towns I think we mentioned in the part about the Simeonites right at the beginning are all mentioned already when we mentioned the towns within Judah. So it's like these are the towns in Judah, and then like, oh, actually these are Simeon's towns. So it's like, it's interesting. It's probably referring to a very later period when Judah had become, the most powerful tribe, and its natural borders were so much larger than what they probably were originally that the Simeonites were engulfed by them, and then they're explaining this away by saying, this is what they got at the beginning because the Judah needed more space or something like that.
Yeah, the interpretation of every bit of the Bible. It was always like this, I swear. Good to know that, the proud tradition continues of divvying up the land of the people you're going to genocide before you've even bothered to kill them. But, while this is incredibly boring to just read, you make a good point about the way that, you're justifying all kinds of things. And Judah also, because the whole mythos of, we were once a united kingdom under David, then Israel in the north and Judah in the south. It was supposed to be the 10 other tribes had gone to the north, and Judah remained with David, and Benjamin also cast in their lot with Judah. So they were the southern kingdom, those 2 tribes, which is kind of ironic because Saul was from Benjamin, but that's a whole nother.
They just happen to be next to each other.
Yeah, but then if Simeon is within the territory of Judah, how the fuck do they defect to the north? Like, it just doesn't work.
I think they can. Yeah.
We
I
got
think
a
because they're
couple
like such a
comments.
small group. Yeah.
I have one thing to add. I'm hoping that my audio is better now. Is it not?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it was simply that in according to 2 Chronicles 15:9 and 34:6, it also mentions that many of the Simeonites had migrated to Ephraim and Manasseh as another reason why they eventually, as a territory, became absorbed by Judah.
Right, and I think that also there's also like Dan as well has like some portion that's very close to Judah, but by the time of the later prophets and stuff, they're just one town in the north or something like that, like Dan of the Galilee or something like that.
Yeah, Dan and Beersheba are the 2 locations, but the town of Dan was named during, in imagined history, it was named during the time of,
but here it
I
says
mean,
Beersheba is part
conquest,
of
but
Simeon,
it had more than that for the tribe, presumably. Yeah, I feel like there is also the possibility that this is a retrospective to try and create an idea of reintegrating the other tribes with Judah, or integrating or reintegrating it, like, your ancestral home was always with us. Come back.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of
Speaking
like
of
that, right?
which-
Because it's I think there was like a curse from Jacob or something.
Mm.
That was kind of like given as, I guess, an etiology for something like this. But the issue with, well, actually, it's not even like a clear interpretation, but it was interpreted that way later. So during the Assyrian invasion, people from the north had to migrate south. So Judah did kind of get all the glory during that period.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Well, and
where
the
we see-
Deuteronomist historians are Judite.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that. So
I got a couple of comments that I got to catch up on. Matt White says, Aaron, fossil fact. Ammonite fossils in Ireland were used as evidence that Patrick turned the snakes to stone. And then John 73 John says, wait, I think I missed one of those names. Can we go over them again? I'm sure they're
Sure
very
thing.
important.
Sure thing, John.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then Eric Wander says, to whom were the cities of Axtal and Zoria
He means-
given?
I think
It should be Eshtaol and Sora. Yeah. The thing
But
is,
that's
this
in
is actually
41.
in verse. This is verse
Well, I'm going to
41.
finish the question. Joshua 15 says they were given to Judah, but this chapter says they were given to Dan. Sorry to ask this now, but I have to leave.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
See,
So
are
quick,
you expecting there to be consistency in the scriptures within the
This is a
same
mis-
chapter? Come
This is probably
on.
these are probably mistakes, but the traditional excuse is that they were these towns were Judahite towns, but the Danites got land near them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the SBL says, while tradition located Dan originally in the south, as described here, Dan's relocation to the far north is reported in Judges. So it's
I also see a comment. Somebody says that that they thought the Bible was written in 722 A.D. But yeah. So
Which
Lawrence,
the
you
Bible?
want to give a more accurate summary?
Wait, hold on.
I think
I'm
that's
sorry,
more
I'm
of
sorry.
like the
What did you just
exile,
say?
722 BC. Maybe they're mixing that up.
No, I think he's doing it on purpose. He literally wrote CE 722 AD, like he's stressing that it was
Say the
after.
sentence again, please.
I heard the Bible was
Quantum
written in
Quantum
722.
Kamada
Yeah.
says, I heard the Bible was written in CE 722 AD. How the hell could anybody write, and then there's some kind of image, what was said in the year 0 if it was over 700 years later?
Okay, so I guess aside from there never being a year 0, common misconception, I made that mistake too. But the no, where did the claim come from? What?
So
We have
if we were going to
manuscripts
give a
that are older than
summary,
that.
if we're going to give a summary when the Bible was written, what would be your answer?
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. So we have some of the early prophets, prophetic works, I should say, going back to the 8th century, and that'll be Amos and Hosea, and then we have some around the time of the exile. Right before the exile, we have stuff like the first layer of the Deuteronomistic history, and then we have through the exile and beyond, we have the composition of the rest of the Deuteronomistic history, and in that same time period, in my view at least, we have the composition of the Torah, the Torah texts. We have then after that, there's we have like throughout that time period scattered throughout like some of the minor prophets, right? And also during that time, starting probably a little bit earlier in my view, some of the the Psalms are beginning to be compiled, and then once we get to the after the exile, we have like Ezra and Nehemiah, and then we have in the 2nd century BCE Daniel, and then eventually we get to the 1st century with some of the early Christian texts. We have the works of Paul, then the Gospels and the Pseudo-Paulines around the same around roughly the same time period. I'm not going to get into specifics, and we have a Revelation around the end of the 1st century, and then some Pseudo-Pauline and some more stuff written in the 2nd century, and that's the and then
there's no answer. It's a melee that was, parts were written earlier, and then parts were cut together and compiled, and then parts were edited, and then parts were dropped, and then people yelled at each other for a few hundred years over what should be included. And I think, when was the canon decided? It was the 4th century.
Okay, well, that's a much bigger question. What I really want to do is at some point make a video on the history of biblical canon, because that is that's a far more interesting subject than people actually think it is. So it was very organic in what each community thought was their, what they viewed as canon, or what I should say, what they viewed as scripture, because a canon is a closed book of scripture. So the development of biblical canon was, at least in some traditions, was solidified by the 4th century, but it was still not like a set thing. It being like set for all traditions at some point was that was a later thing. Anyways, we have attestations of certain canons, like certain canon lists, right? Going back to like the 3rd century, sometime in the 3rd century, potentially the 2nd century, but that's really speculative. There's a long history of this, but like just in case anyone in chat's getting the wrong idea, the Council of Nicaea is not where they made canon. That's not where canon was decided upon. That's not what happened. This was a far more organic evolution, and
so what we've got is,
it wasn't until later that it was solidified.
So you're talking about that the earliest works would be in the 700s BC or BCE, and then the Hebrew Bible was completed round about the 1st century.
Well, by that time it was definitely done.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we get the Gospels of the New Testament, all that, and that is pretty much all of it is over that 1st century, or is it the 2nd century also?
Almost all of it is from the 1st century. There are a few texts that go to the 2nd century.
2nd Peter, anyone?
Yeah.
So when people tell you that it was written by so many different authors over 1,500 years, was it 1,500 years that they commonly say? That the young Earth creationists seem to think.
Yeah, they like to.
I say 1,000 years, but
okay.
I usually say 1,000 years.
The young Earth creationists and the evangelicals, and a good way to tell that they know nothing about who actually wrote the Bible is that they'll say it was written by 40 different authors over 1,500 years, and it's just so coherent. Which, as we've noticed in this chapter alone, the fuck it is. But 40 different authors are the 40 traditional authors, where we imagine that Moses not only existed, but actually wrote the whole Pentateuch, including the Deuteronomy, which nobody ever thought that, who knew anything, that Isaiah is a single author, that Ezekiel is a single author, that, Ezra and Nehemiah were actually written by them and not, and that, not accounting for Deuteronomistic history or anything that's known about anything.
Even for the New Testament, John, some believe that it was sort of kind of a Johannine community.
Yeah, I do accept the Johannine community thing, but like the author of the Gospel of John was not the same one who wrote the Johannine epistles, and that was not the same person that wrote Revelation.
And none of them were the apostle, the illiterate fisherman who never wrote a damn thing if he existed at all.
What about Luke and Acts? Are they the same author? Is that why they're joined together?
The same author, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that.
Also
okay. By the way, So, if you want a really simple, like visual representation of like when the Bible was written based on an academic perspective, I'd recommend the useful charts "When was the Bible written?" But they've also got a series on who wrote the Bible, which is like a bunch of videos, which is also very interesting. And that talks about when they were written as well.
And
then Mr. Beepers.
Sorry, one more comment. So the there's a good book on the development of biblical canon from Lee Martin McDonald. It's just called The Biblical Canon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Beepers says, RN Raw, can you do a video someday on the origin of playing records backwards to find secret Satan messages? I don't.
Satanic Panic.
I will probably do that. No. And then Selena Girl, with 3 R's together, Selena Girl 69 says, my Sunday school teacher was into Bible history along with Jehoiakim in Judea.
Jehoiakim, the king Jehoiakim of Judea.
Yeah, but
English,
as a king, you should use the English name. I think.
Yeah.
And was that king historical beyond the Bible?
So
I
Jehoiakim,
think
was that one
something.
of the guys at the end that was renamed?
Oh,
If I'm remembering properly.
Wait.
I think his birth name was Eliakim, but
oh,
I don't know if that's.
Okay, I don't remember this one specifically, but
he's not the last one. He's not the last one.
In the Deuteronomistic history, a lot of the kings can be extra biblically verified. So, like, I am actually fine with accepting the historicity of quite a lot of the kings. Like, even if the Bible is our only attestation for it, that's fine. I don't think, like, God had any role to play in that. These were annals, or these were at least written based off of annals. They give you their sources. So
okay, yeah, he's mentioned in like actual Babylonian texts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
like, a lot of
them
them
were later king.
Babylonian Chronicles.
Yeah.
So
So
like
quite
a lot of them
late,
were,
actually.
Yeah, and
I think the earliest king we have evidence is like
Omri.
What's his name? Omri. Yeah.
Yeah, Omri. Yeah.
Yeah, you should check out the video about who's biblical.
Although I would also say David. Although I do understand why some people would have kind of an issue with it, right? Because it says from the house of David.
The house of David, exactly. Like it's
Which
the
I'm
mythological ancestor. He could just as easily have been as made up as Romulus and Remus, and them just being, we're of the house of this great ancestor who's all heroic and shit.
I would kind of agree with I would agree with Lawrence. I don't have a problem with there having been a David.
Yeah, just some warlord.
And with like Solomon, for example, all of these magical abilities that Solomon is said to have had, being able to speak to the animals, having genies in his employ, being able to control which direction and whether the wind blew.
Over 1,000 wives. Let's not forget.
That's Solomon, I think.
That's not that fantastical.
Right.
Yeah. Never have more wives than there are days in the year.
Yeah, you're being a busy little boy. Okay. Couple more comments. Trevor and Wright. Trevor and Wright says, in Christian history, Martin Luther thought that Protestant Christianity needed to take a stance against the Roman Catholic. What exactly was the difference between them anyway, and why? Yeah, what's the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism?
No, I think it was talking about the canon, right?
So the biggest issue was indulgences for Martin Luther.
Paying money to priests to be forgiven, right?
You'd pay them to have your sins paid off, essentially. This practice started during the Crusades to get people to go crusading, but it did keep up for a while. And Martin Luther was like, "Hey, it's kind of bullshit. Like, you can't be paying your way out of judgment. Like, that's fucking insane." So that was his big issue there. Fair points. That was definitely the big one. There were some other ones that I need to familiarize.
I should.
The only fair point he made.
Complicated.
I should mention.
At that
99 theses, right? There were 99 theses.
95.
95?
And he wasn't the only one. There was also Calvin. Like, there was a movement to break away from the authority of the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church was corrupt, and a lot of the priests at that time didn't even believe it. They were joking to each other in Latin across the as they were doing the rituals for Eucharist about how God is dead. And, they didn't realize that Martin Luther could understand them because none of the, illiterate peasants could understand them when they spoke in Latin. So basically what it boils down to now is that Catholics worship the authority of the church and Protestants worship the Bible.
If anybody's interested, there is a playlist made by Ryan Reeves regarding both Luther and Calvin, which I highly recommend if you're interested in both these people.
Share it in the Discord.
I'll give it in the chat as well so that Peter may link it.
One other very important aspect of that time, the Reformation, was that the Bible was made readable because somehow they got it translated into German. And so when people had the ability to read the Bible, they're like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like what we're noticing here in practice. And so that's really interesting how the Bible itself kind of brought about all that much change.
Yeah, and that was good and bad. They threw off indulgences and things like that. And it's good for people to know what it is they're supposed to be worshiping. But at the same time, the God of the Bible is so fucking evil that every single movement in history, whether in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, to go back to the original text and back to the original religion and the pure faith of God, has resulted in all of the bloodshed ever. Like, it just life becomes an existential horror, terrorism, misery of life, and just endless death and bloodshed, the loss of all human liberty, and frankly, a reason to live. So it's good to know what it is. It's not good to think it's a good thing.
But I was told that God is life and love.
Yeah, and
so is
funny thing is, so is the narcissist that's beating you because he loves you. That's all out of love.
Okay, so Dara O'Kane says, why do Jews in the Bible keep worshiping other gods after seeing God, knowing he's real? Even the smartest man in the world, King Solomon, believed in them.
Yeah, that's
I don't know if King Solomon is said to believe in other gods, is he?
He built like polite shrines for his wives' gods because he
I remember that.
An asshole about it. But it's well, basically it's because it's bullshit. It's because
there is a trope.
It's the same as I'm beating you because you burnt my dinner. The job of the priests is to do that for God, except you're suffering because some of you worshipped other gods and you totally knew it was wrong and you have no excuse, blah, 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 blah. It's just excuse making after the fact for why it's really your fault that God failed to keep all his promises and let you be tortured and enslaved. Yeah. But it's not his fault. It's your fault.
Yeah, they had to justify the exile, so they polemicize this. But the actual religious diversity in Israel and Judah was there was a lot. There was a lot of religious diversity. We can tell that from a whole bunch of archaeological finds, like from inscriptions, from different texts. There are plenty of hints of it in the Bible. So it's like, but the kind of retroactively looking at it is a polemic way of doing it.
I think you could say the Israelites in the Bible, their credulity had plot armor. Like, they would believe things because of the plot.
It's almost like none of them ever actually saw any of those things, and the priests are just full of shit.
Speaking of that, before we move on, I do want to mention there are some issues with the Zebulun passage there. I don't know if you're going to touch on that, Tomer.
I'm waiting.
Which bit?
God, we have Tomer's commentary.
Right. So going back to verse 10 to 16, where it talks about the Zebulunites. A few issues that I found based on the commentaries is, one, that the city of Nazareth is strangely omitted in that passage, which you'd figure that it'd be there if Nazareth was to be like this very important city.
It wasn't. I don't think Nazareth is even. I don't think Nazareth is even attested to outside of the New Testament as a place.
No, I think it was it. No, that was Bethlehem. Never mind. But like we do have, like, we do have the like we know that there was a historical Nazareth. I don't know if it would have been around at this time, but
it wasn't a big place.
yeah, it certainly wasn't that important.
Yeah,
which is why if Jesus was, if there's that debate between like was Jesus born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, it probably would have been Nazareth, because Bethlehem was attached to the prophecy thing, and there would be a reason to change it from Nazareth to Bethlehem, but not from Bethlehem to Nazareth. So it would be more likely.
I mean, the thing is, there is a fair argument to say that Jesus the Nazarene doesn't mean that he was from a place called Nazareth. It could have meant he was known as a Nazarene because he had long hair and didn't drink wine and stuff like that.
Yeah, but honestly, with the amount of
and then
things
the
that are
city
very obviously
invented.
written into the Jesus story to fulfill the prophecy, which oftentimes they don't even understand the prophecy and are going off a mistranslation of the prophecy.
Yeah,
it's
all retcons. Like, when did it become a thing? Like, oh, he's actually from a place called Nazareth. Oh no, but the prophecy says he comes from Bethlehem. Let's make a story of how he went to Bethlehem. Like, if he was just a Nazarene from Bethlehem, it would have fixed things. I don't know why. Yeah,
we got another comment from
why it's historical.
Or Zayler, I guess is how you would say that. Does anyone on the panel have an opinion on gods and Jungian creatures of the unconscious?
So I'm not sure what the Jungian creature of the unconscious is, but my opinion on
Jung is
Jung,
Carl Jung, maybe.
Yeah, it is Carl Jung. And his analysis of religion from the I forget which book it was that we had to read for my religions course, but I remember it being garbage. I was like, this is so devoid of critical analysis that like it's to people who are like just learning about like psychology in religion, it makes sense, but it doesn't take into account any historical setting at all, and it's really, really poor work. So I'm not sure about the creatures of the consciousness thing, but
I
do
if we're
remember
talking about
reading
the collective unconscious kind of vibe. I think Jung got a little into his subconscious.
I think this is out of our field of expertise. So
yeah. All right. So Tomer?
Yeah.
Well, I've got two more things.
Sure.
One quick one. Apparently, and I don't know this for sure, that the Bethlehem in verse 15 is not the Bethlehem we all think of. Apparently.
Well, if it's in, whose region is it in?
Zebulun.
Yeah, I would have. Yeah, so Bethlehem should be in Judah, shouldn't it?
Yeah. Dozeman has a comment. It must be distinguished from the southern Bethlehem, located within the territory of Judah, approximately 5 miles south of Jerusalem. For example, Judges 17:7-9, 1 Samuel 17:12. The southern Bethlehem of Judah does not appear in the book of Joshua.
Well, okay. Steinsaltz actually has a comment here. He says that the Galilean Bethlehem, not the Bethlehem in Judah, which is mentioned in Judges and Ruth.
So it's the subtle difference between North Dakota and South Carolina.
Even Kimchi says that it. Kimchi says that it's not the Bethlehem of Judah.
Okay, but the question is, what did they mean originally, right? Were they referring to Bethlehem and then just stuck it in the wrong place?
No, that's a different Bethlehem, I think.
Yeah. Or it could be that Bethlehem wasn't a big city until later on. So, they were like, oh, it can't be mentioned, and then they're like, but it's in the list. Okay, just put it in this other place. I don't know. That is a good question. Didn't even notice that.
And then I've got a third one. I'd say third and best, which is that according to Genesis 49:13, Zebulun would live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. And so there are many who consider, based on this description, that Zebulun is landlocked. And so what's suggested is that there was a strip of land, an enclave that went through Issachar's territory, and then that would eventually make sense of Genesis 49. Otherwise, there seems to be an issue there. What do you guys know about this?
I have a comment on the Zebulun part, but I'm waiting.
Oh, yeah? Kinnereth is in Issachar or in Naphtali? I think it's in Naphtali. Okay, whatever. We haven't got there yet.
No, it's
right,
no, it's in 34. It's in Naphtali. Yeah, it's in Naphtali. Okay, so I'll start my commentary first on verses 1 through 9. Nelson comments, the portion of the list in verses 2 to 6, along with En Rimon, is related to part of Judah's District 1, 1526 to 32, which is sometimes thought to have provided its source. However, Ether and Ashan, presumably in the Shephelah, appear in District 4 instead, 1542. The names in the Judah town list segment and the Simeon list appear in nearly the same order where they overlap, Molada being an exception. The division into two districts, verses 2 through 6 and 7, suggests an administrative background for this data, although one can only speculate as to date and purpose. 1 Chronicles 4:31 highlights this division with the assertion that the first district was Simeon's, quote, until David became king, end quote. The association of the Shephelah towns, Ether and Asham, with En Rimon suggests that verse 7 represents a district of northern and western Simeonite towns. Comparable to the town list for Dan, verses 40 to 46, the Simeonite list designates special claims within the territory of Greater Judah, quote unquote. One could postulate various bureaucratic purposes for such a catalog. On verse 10 to 16, Dozeman comments, Zebulun is introduced as a frontier north of West Manasseh and the sons of Joseph. The Hebrew gvul, boundary, appears 3 times. The first indicates the southern reach of Zebulun in verse 10, and the final 2 describe the borders, verses 11 and 14. The distribution of gvul indicates a focus on the borders, which concludes with the list of cities in verse 15. The place name, Sarid, marks the southernmost reach of Zebulun's land. It also begins the description of the border moving westward. Then the border reverses direction, starting once again at Sarid, but this time moving east, then farther east, before changing direction. Zebulun shares no cities with West Manasseh. The region of Zebulun becomes increasingly vague, however, as the border progresses east and north. The 5 cities in verse 15 provide little clarification. 2 may be identified, Shimron and Bethlehem, while the numerical summary of 12 cities in the MT, which is absent in the Septuagint, is unconnected to the description of Zebulun. And finally, 17 to 23, Butler comments, Issachar received the important Jezreel Valley. Knauf calls verse 22 a caricature of a border description. He sees Issachar as overwhelmingly a Canaanite tribe made to look like an Israelite one. The least one can say in return is that a significant number of Israelites, even Israelite tribes, eventually came to live more like the Canaanites than they did like Yahweh commanded. It is quite possible that Israelite tribes entering and settling in the land of Canaan expanded by absorbing Canaanites such as Rahab and the Gibeonites, who were only samples of other Canaanite groups Israel absorbed. Too frequently, the political absorption had a reverse side of Canaanite religious absorption of the Israelite group. And that's it for my part of this commentary. Should we move to the... Yes? We still have the next segment, so...
True.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to have that much commentary, I guess, because it's like mostly...
Well,
there's a lot of verses.
Yeah, but there are some...
I'll try to get through this bit quickly again.
Sure.
That was the portion of the right. Now we're going to do it. Asher. The 5th lot fell to the tribe of Asherites by their clans. Their boundary ran along the hills Chalkath, Chali, Beten, and Achsaf, Alamelech, Amach. Sorry, what did I say?
It's Achshav. You said Achsaf.
Oh yeah, Achsaf, Alamelech, Amad, Mishal, and it touched Carmel on the west and Shichor Livnat. It also ran along the east side to Beth Dagon and touched Zebulon and the valley of Yiftach El to the north, Beth Emek and Neiel. Then it ran to Kavul on the north, Evron, Rochav, Chamon, Kana, up to Great Sidon. The boundary turned to Ramah and onto the fortified city of Tyre. Then the boundary turned to Hosa, and it ran on westward to Mechabel, and Achziv.
Mechevel.
Was it? Mechevel.
You said mechabel.
Oh, okay. Mechebel. Uma, Afek, and Rehov. 22 cities with their villages. That was the portion of the tribe of the Asherites by their clans, those towns with their villages. The sixth lot fell to the Naphtalites. The Naphtalites by their clans. Their boundary ran from Chelef, Elon, Betzananim, Adamim, Nekev, and Yavneel to Lakum, and it ended at the Jordan. The boundary then turned westward to Aznoth Tavor and ran from there to Hukak. It touched Zebulun on the south, and it touched Asher on the west, and Judah at the Jordan on the east. Its fortified towns were Tzidim, Tser, Hamath, Rakath, and Kinneret. Adamah, Ramah, Chatzor, Kedesh, Edrei, En Hatzor, Yiron, Migdal El, Beth Anath. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Charem, Beth Anath, and Beth Shemesh. 19 towns with their villages.
I think it's
That was
Chorem,
the portion. Yeah, Chorem.
He said Chorem. Whatever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Chorem, yeah. That was the portion of the tribe of the Naphtalites by their clans, the town with their villages. Should I keep going? Or
Yeah, keep going. Finish the chapter.
yeah? Okay. The seventh lot fell to the tribe of the Danites by their clans. Their allotted territory comprised Sorah, Eshtaol, Ir Shemesh, Sha'alavim, Ayalon, and Yitla. Elon, Timnah, and Ekron, El Tekeh, Gibtaon, and Baalat. Yehud, Bnei Brak, and Gath Rimon. Me Yarkon, Rakon, at the border near Joppa or Jaffa. Yafo, as it's spelled here.
I have no idea.
But it's spelled Jaffa, but people say Jaffa, don't they? Which
Jaffa.
means beautiful. Yeah, Jaffa's
Jaffa
But
is-
in the JPS, it has Joppa for some reason.
Yeah, I see Joppa, yeah.
But it's Yafo.
Yeah, so yeah, people know it by Jaffa, so yeah, I should use the English name for that one. But the territory of the Danites slipped from their grasp. So the Danites migrated and made war on Leshem. They captured it and put it to the sword. They took possession of it and settled in it, and they changed the name of Leshem to Dan, after their ancestor Dan. That was the portion of the Danites by their clans, those towns with their villages. When they had finished allotting the land by its boundaries, the Israelites gave portion in their midst to Joshua son of Nun. At God's command, they gave him the town that he asked for, Timnath Serach, in the hill country of Ephraim. He fortified the town and settled in it. These are the portions assigned by lot to the tribes of Israel by the priest Eleazar, Joshua son of Nun, and the family heads, before God at Shiloh at the entrance of the tent of meeting, when they had finished dividing the land.
Well, yeah, there is a continuation break here.
Yeah. Oh.
So
We forgot to say, there's one missing from this list. Zarahemla.
Shut up. It's Zarahemla.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It's
That's
feeling this is a Jewish joke. I don't know.
No, it's a Mormon joke.
Oh, right.
See-
Okay,
see,
sorry.
Tomer does a lot of reading in the Blasphemy or in the Reading Joseph Smith show on Sundays too. And Zarahemla is one of the fictitious towns of the Native American Jews.
Yes, the totally real Native American
Yeah.
Jews that rode the horses that didn't exist here, and and were white and delightsome like
Obviously, they were
Lilith,
tapirs.
tapirs, not horses.
Yes,
Right.
they rode the tapirs with their 5-headed battle penises.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if there's one thing guaranteed to strike fear into the hearts of your foes, it's 5-headed battle penises. But I did actually just get a Book of Mormon, so haha.
Those herds of tapirs from the lake, from the Great Lakes region.
Right.
So
They're
Tomer,
much
did you
the
complete your commentary for this whole
No.
chapter?
He hasn't
No.
started slow.
I haven't started it. This is portion 4.
24.
Thank you, Peter. So, okay. I'll start on 24 to 31. Ahituv comments, according to Judges 1, 31 to 32, the list of cities in Asher's territory included the Canaanite cities, which were not inherited by the Asherites. Akko, Achziv, Chelba, Afik, and Rehov. Asher did not achieve the unification of its territory as a single unity regarding population. It held the space available between the Canaanite cities, as interpreted in Judges 132. The portion of Asher raises a special problem because all of it describes South Phoenicia. This territory was not in Israel's control, but only during David's period and the first half of Solomon's period, who later gave it to Hiram, king of Tyre, according to 1 Kings 9:10-13. It could be that the author had a document from the days of the United Monarchy of Israel, probably a description of the 9th district of Solomon's districts. Thus, there is no border description between the tribes of Asher and Zebulun, both of which were unified in the district. On verses 32-39, Nelson comments, the border description is difficult to unravel, but clearly comes in two segments corresponding to verses 33 and 34. The verb shuv at the beginning of verse 34 is functioning as it does in verses 12 and 27 to indicate that a new section of border begins at the original starting point. Thus, verse 33 runs east from Chelef to the Jordan. Only Adami Nekeb and Yavniel on this line can be located with any assurance. Then in verse 34, the focus shifts back westward from Chelef to Aznot Tavor, obviously near Mount Tavor, and traces a very generalized line from there via Hukok that follows on the south the edge of Zebulun and then on the west that of Asher. Then follows the eastern border at the end of verse 34, that is, the Jordan. There is no indication of a northern border, except perhaps for the mysterious Judah. This deficiency may have resulted from a concern to leave room in the conceptual system for Dan's northern territory. The suggestion that verse 33 represents this missing north border, as suggested by Noth, is unconvincing. On verses 40-48, Butler notes that Dan lacks a border description. He notes Knauf's opinion that Dan's territory has already been assigned to Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh, which leads to the conclusion that Dan was just an important city on the northern border of Israel. Butler, however, writes that this conclusion denies any historicity behind the Samson narratives of Judges 13-16, which Knauf dates in the 6th or 5th centuries. He also writes, Hess dates the Dan town list to the time of Dan's conquest of Leshem, which was renamed Dan. McConville and Williams observe that, quote, the case of Dan posits a sharp discrepancy between the notion of legitimate possession and the actuality of Israel's occupation, end quote, claiming the Judges 18 narrative, quote, mimics the dully authorized conquest of the promised land, end quote. Hawk observes, quote, Dan thus represents both failure and initiative taken to the extreme. Dan succeeds in securing a tribal possession, but does so apart from the system that legitimates its claim to land, end quote. Bartush claims that by rights, Dan had an indisputable and ongoing claim to the southern inheritance or allotment, where some tribal members stayed. This leaves the northern territory Dan conquered, quote unquote, as not part of divine entitlement.
So we're kind of criticizing Dan because they went and killed other people to get slightly different land that wasn't the land the magic rocks said they were supposed to get because they couldn't get that land.
Yeah, I wonder if this is a polemic against the Danites of the north, or they had that because everyone knew that the Danites had conquered this place, they had to explain how that fit in with the whole territory thing, allotment.
Well, it's always good to let magic rocks decide the distribution of the territory you're going to steal from the people you're in the middle of genociding. Magic rocks.
On verse 47, Dozeman comments, verse 47 is an editorial addition that creates a breach to the portrayal of Dan in Judges. The MT version states that Dan lost the western frontier, which caused the tribe to migrate north to Leshem Dan, thus linking the southern and northern locations of Dan as in Judges 18. The Septuagint includes the critical evaluation of Dan from the account of its failed conquest in Judges 1:34-35. The Septuagint states that Dan failed to conquer the Amorites, which contrasts to Judah's successful conquest of Lachish. Both editions harmonize the literary relationship between the books of Joshua and of Judges in distinct ways, suggesting ongoing inner biblical interpretation well into the Hellenistic period. And finally, 49-51, Galil comments, these verses signed the description of the land's allotment in the second edition of the book. Verse 51 brings another summary written by the priestly author of the book. After the completion of the land's allotment to the tribes, they, according to the author of the second edition, began to portion a territory to Joshua inside the territory of his tribe, the tribe of Ephraim. This story was probably based on a tradition preserved by the Ephraimites that Timnat Serach or Cheres was Joshua's burial place, a tradition which probably had a basis in reality, according to 24:29-30, end quote. And Origen wrote that Joshua's inheritance of land in Ephraim represents the Lord inhabiting the souls of those who produce the fruit of the Spirit.
Classic.
Classic Origen.
I've got a better one. So, R.C. Sproul, who's kind of evangelical reformed type of guy, they look at this last section where it talks about Joshua, like him being last, like the last one. What a selfless spirit he possessed, and blah blah blah. And how they also contrast this with the church, in the sense like, well, just like Joshua, Jesus is sort of the same thing in the sense that while all the territory wasn't really inherited like at once, because essentially if you're critical about the reading, there are some areas that are not like yet possessed. So in the same way, it's the church that the church still has land to conquer, although it's not by force or genocide, but through the gospel and whatnot. But they just completely read Jesus all over this passage as if to say, just like Joshua, who was, seen not only as a political leader, but a builder, Joshua, because, when he possessed his land, it says in there that he fortified the town and he built it. So just like Jesus, blah, blah, blah. It's crazy.
Okay, so Minute Rice throws in for $6.66 and says, shut up and take my money. Wait, crap, don't shut up, but still take my money. Okay, thank you. And then Trevor and Wright says, the tribes mentioned in Joshua had a common problem with the Canaanites, which lifestyle they adopted. This sounds like a slow takeover of Canaanite territory over time and integration.
Weren't they Canaanites?
There are two hypotheses for it. There's
they speak their languages.
I think the prevailing
Hebrew
theory
is-
was that the Israelites were Canaanites.
I wouldn't say prevailing. It's literally split. So it's split between those who think that they were just descendants of Canaanites, and then there are also those who do believe in some migration from the south.
Okay.
Which would be which would also fit in well with the Midianite hypothesis.
They could still be largely Canaanites who had some influence based on an influx from the south as well. So
that makes sense.
Because a lot of these clearly are
particularly
just trying
like
to
Yahweh,
retcon a history.
Like the Judaism religion aspect maybe is more foreign to the Canaanites, but I think the people themselves. The fact that the Hebrew, the language, is a Canaanite language and almost what's the word? Mutually intelligible with the what languages is it? Aramite and Edomite or whatever.
Aramaic?
No, not Aramaic.
No.
Aramaic would have been slightly further outside of the Canaanite family, but like the fact they could speak to the Phoenicians and the like in the same language more or less.
Sure, but then because one of the biggest issues is so Yahweh wasn't a god in the Canaanite pantheon. So how the hell did he get in there? So that's why we have this this different explanation from so there was a migration. That is how the god came in with a certain group of people. So I guess it really depends on if we're talking about
I've heard of the Levites as being foreign.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that one.
I haven't heard that one.
I
No,
can't
one of the things
remember.
that I keep hearing is that from the archaeology guys, they're going to say that in terms of material evidence, like in the archaeology, there's no distinction between Israelites and Canaanites, that like it's all blended together.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know.
I maintain that Daniel Dennett is correct, that religion is literally a mental parasite, if not physically, then ideologically, and often spreads at the expense of killing one of its hosts. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, after all. But you can have, a biologically Canaanite group infected with the mental parasite of Yahweh, start isolating and distinguishing themselves and become more and more isolationist, and then retcon their history and be all dramatic and shit, which, yeah, nobody religious has ever done that.
Matt White throws in a comment, says, panel, can we confirm that Phoenicia/Phoenician and Phoenix come from a cognate root meaning brightly colored?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
What root?
I am
I
not
mean,
a linguist.
if Phoenicia is a Greek word to refer to those people, then it makes sense that it might have something to do with like the color of the ink of the dyes that they would have produced, maybe.
Possible.
Okay. So I'm reading from Wikipedia, so not the best source, but it reads that the word Phoenicia is already attested in Mycenaean Greek Linear B from the 2nd millennium BC as
Wow.
Ponikijo. In those records, it means crimson or palm tree and does not denote a group of people.
Minute Rice
Crimson or palm
adds, says, Origin is my favorite commentator Tomer's brought in so far. Not because he's any good, but because the ways he's bad are fucking hilarious.
Well, see, in that case, Minute Rice, you should have loved P-Town.
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of like watching a Breen film. You're like, this is
mean,
so
honestly,
horrible, but I can't look away.
honestly, I don't know if I should be proud or not.
Hey, you're bringing entertainment to the commentaries. It's good.
Yeah.
Hey, so
but-
can I read from
Lawrence,
the
Lawrence,
hello?
Hold on, Mark. Just a second, Lawrence. It's funny you should mention P-Town. I went on his live show a few days ago because he did a presentation to convince atheists that God exists, and I asked him for sources, was kicked 3 times, and at the end he cried on his live show and then deleted it completely. It didn't go well.
Wow.
Because you asked for sources?
Yeah, I wanted sources for his presentation. Apparently, I wasn't allowed to ask that. I was to address the presentation, not ask for his sources.
Oh my god. That's part of
so
addressing
I'm gonna just based on your description, I'm gonna guess that he didn't convince many.
No. He got 2 atheists who both asked him about sources, and he was really, really mad about that.
Okay.
And then his Christian friends started criticizing him as well and started fighting on the stream. So that it was a cool thing to watch. To say.
This is what happens when it reminds me of when Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron tried to do their debate, and they just like completely it was ridiculous. It was the Crocoduck plus the 10 Commandments bullshit line that they had, and I realized they're not actually engaging in a debate. They don't even know what a debate is or how to engage in one, but they wouldn't care if they did. They just think that their gospel is magic and it will magically touch the hearts of people God has magically designated to be gullible in exactly the right way. And so it's just their job to say their magic words and let the spirit move who it may.
Peter, if you want a lot of sources, just take a walk across the border and get some frites. Belgium, they have lots of sources there.
Yeah.
Mark, were you reading something when we?
Yeah,
when
I was just commenting on the whole thing about the term Phoenicia, which I all I see when I look at the Hebrew, I see the word Canaan. Like, isn't that the Canaanite same word, right?
The Phoenicians called themselves the Canaanese, so they weren't really a separate culture until later, I think, and the Greeks called them Phoenicia. And then they went and conquered North Africa, Carthage, and then their language developed into Punic, which is still a Canaanite language, but different by that time.
Are we ready to move on to chapter 20?
Do it.
It's
Okay.
9 verses, so it'll fit you well, Aaron.
Oh, thank you. And there's not a whole lot of Hebrew in here. So then the Lord said to Joshua, tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I have instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally, accidentally but intentionally is an option, accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When they flee to one of those cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally without malice of forethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled. I'm going to need explanation of that in a moment. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill city of Ephraim,
Very
and
good.
Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. East of the Jordan, on the other side of Jericho, they designated Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau, and the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead, and the tribe of Gad in Golan and in Bashan, and the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly.
Yeah, so Aaron, maybe you, I'm sure you remember some of this avenger of blood stuff from, was it Leviticus?
Leviticus, yeah.
This is just designating the cities of refuge. So
It's
places where you could go to hide for a little bit until your trial.
Wait,
It's important.
just help the audience that maybe didn't hear that part. What is an avenger of blood, and how does this all work? Why
I have a comment on this.
Their kin. It's their kin.
Okay, let Tomer read his comment, and then we'll discuss it.
I have something too. I don't want to ruin Tomer, but it has to do with ancient blood revenge as a practice.
If someone killed your kinsman, you had the right to avenge them, and possibly also the responsibility to avenge them. This is a very ancient way of thinking, but it was very honor bound. I mean, you see this even with like all over the world at various places. Even hell, like you play like a video game, like The Witcher and Skellige type thing. You're gonna have that same kind of attitude of the honorable thing is to go forward and kill the person to avenge, and it's so they were considered you have the right to avenge your kin, but the idea of the law was to put it within bounds so you didn't just end up with wild blood-fused Hatfield and McCoys killing each other forever.
Okay, so I'm just trying to imagine some guy going to the city gate and having that conversation was like, so you killed him accidentally? Oh yeah, it was totally an accident. And you you killed him unintentionally? Well,
I mean, the hack's head flew off, but I may or may not have loosened it. So
it's kind of like I think the idea is that you would go to the city of refuge regardless, kind of, and then you would have a court case, and then if they decided that you were to be executed, then they would send you back to your town, and then you would be executed by your town. And if they decided that you should stay in exile, then you had to stay in the town, couldn't never leave, and then you would wait until the high priest died, which is just a funny way of measuring time.
So if you're going to accidentally kill your husband, wait until you've got a really old high priest.
I bet the murder rates went up the older they
Indeed.
Okay, so I'll start my commentary. At first, I'll begin with verse 1. Dozeman comments, this is the last divine address to Joshua in the book. The speech is signaled with the Hebrew verb daber, or diber, where was it? Yeah, daber, yeah, the verb daber, to speak, as compared with the expected verb amar, to say. The Septuagint reflects the distinction in the MT, translating the instances of the Hebrew amar with lego, or apa, and the one instance of dabar with laleo, or elalesen, by elalesen. The use of the
Wait,
verb dabar.
Are, are you saying that this is the only instance where God uses it says Vayedaber God?
In Joshua, I think.
Oh, okay.
Instead of the amar, you have the
Vayomer,
daber.
yeah.
So where was I? Yeah. The use of the verb daber corresponds to the priestly account of the cities of refuge in Numbers 35:9, suggesting an inner biblical relationship between the two texts. On verse 3, accidentally and unintentionally. In Hebrew, it's bishgaga bivli dat. The term for unintentionally, bivli dat, is absent from the Septuagint. Nelson takes it as a Deuteronomistic supplement found in Deuteronomy 4:42 and 19:4. Dozeman writes that the word bishgaga relates chapter 20 to the priestly literature of the Pentateuch, where it is used to indicate sin committed by mistake, either in the context of the cult in Numbers 15:25, Leviticus 4:2 and 22, or in the legal context outside of the cult, Numbers 35:11. He further writes that MT moral likely represents a late and expanded composition that weaves together language about the cities of refuge from Deuteronomy and the priestly literature. On the Avenger of Blood, Ahituv comments, to avenge in Hebrew lig'ol means to return real estate to the family or return somebody who left the family, according to Leviticus 25:25-34 and 47-54. And thus God also avenged, quote unquote, Goel, Israel, in Exodus 6:6, i.e., he brings them to himself. The Avenger of Blood retrieves the stolen blood. The foundational notion is that he who sheds the blood of a person takes away the life, nephesh, of the murdered, as if he steals him. For example, David accuses Saul, quote, you are bent on taking my life, unquote, in 1 Samuel 24:12. The blood avenger who killed the murderer and sheds his blood gives back life for life. The blood avenging is one of the foundations of the tribal regime. In the absence of a stable centralized regime, the blood avenging is used as a protection for the family members and the tribe from the enemy. The tribal society establishes itself on blood avenging, as we now learn from Arab society, where blood avenging continues to this day, despite the efforts of central governments to uproot this practice. A society with a centralized government wishes to cancel the blood avenging practice, or at least minimize it.
I have a question. If you accidentally kill your relative, do you have to kill yourself? Are you the blood avenger for your relative that you killed
presumably
accidentally?
another member of your clan could kill you. It's always.
Yeah, I'm saying, are you obligated under the system?
to kill yourself before you escape yourself to go to the city while you're running away from yourself.
And also, suicide is not allowed. So it's like, are you allowed
how much
to kill
you like your relative? I think.
Which is kind of interesting how Cain gets like a special protection from God not to be avenged.
I think it's pretty clear from the beginning God's always been a bit soft on murder. Not insulting him though.
If it's related to God's will, then it's okay.
Yeah.
On verses 4-6, these verses are mostly absent from the Septuagint, with only until they have stood trial before the assembly in verse 6 remaining. Although Galil writes that it should not be assumed that the Septuagint represents an earlier and shorter version of the chapter, other scholars view MT as an expansion to the original text. Nelson writes that the differences between MT and the Septuagint are best explained as evidence of a further recensional development in the MT tradition. The additions are an intertextual development intended to coordinate Joshua's act with the particulars of Deuteronomy 19 verses 1-13 and Numbers 35:25. Butler cites Samuel Holmes, who writes that it is generally admitted that the Septuagint gives the more original text, and Sojin, who sees the MT editions as, quote, interpretive interpolation, end quote. Dozeman writes that the consensus among interpreters is that the earliest version of Joshua 20 in the Septuagint follows the priestly account of the cities of refuge in Numbers 35 verses 9 to 28, and that the additions of the MT include motifs from Deuteronomy 19 verses 1 to 13. He further writes, the MT expansions create confusion with regard to the process by which the killer undergoes a trial. In the Septuagint, the flow of the narrative is clear. The killer enters the city, and blood guilt is suspended until there is a trial. The MT of verses 45 suggests that some form of trial has already taken place, which makes the reference to the trial in verse 6 awkward. The reference to the high priest in the MT of verse 6 suggests that the textual development is not simply in one direction with the expansion of the MT.
I'm afraid I'm sorry. I was just glancing at the comments, and I don't have a PlayStation. Not my decision. So when someone said it's like Bloodborne's blood echo system, how accurate is that, nerds?
I don't know.
I also do not have a PlayStation.
I've never played Bloodborne.
The last PlayStation I had was a PlayStation 2, and I played a lot of Guitar Hero and GTA San Andreas. That's what I played a lot.
See, my
that's the last actual gaming system I had.
Okay, on verses 7 through 8, Nelson comments, scholars have sometimes suggested that the national boundaries implied in this chapter might be used to date the institution of the cities of refuge. The state-building situation of the United Kingdom has been proposed, along with expansion under Jeroboam II in 2 Kings 14, 25, and 28, or the ambitions of Josiah. However, one should not necessarily assume an actual historical praxis corresponding to either Deuteronomy 19 verses 1 through 8 or Joshua 20. The careful distribution of towns in verses 7 through 8 leaves the impression of the artificial regularity of a literary construction rather than a genuine political program. Inclusion of territory east of the Jordan in the Joshua text more likely relates to the book's ideological stress on the legitimacy of that region rather than to a given historical period.
Yeah, I think after the first temple's destruction, this would have been kind of abolished as a practice, and therefore that by the time this was written, it probably would have been developed, or I don't know, into like they probably handled it in a different way rather than blood vengeance.
And finally, my last comment, they set apart in verse 7, Hebrew it's vayakdishu. The root kuf daled shin usually means to sanctify, but the reading set apart is attested in the Septuagint, Targum, Peshitta. Dozeman notes that many interpret the MT use of sanctified as a textual corruption. Nelson writes that the Septuagint reflects vayikru from the verb kuf resh he, and this was misread by the MT under the influence of the following Kedesh. Butler, however, favors MT and writes that the Septuagint is assimilating verse 7 to Numbers 35. That's it for my comment. Terry.
Cool.
You're muted, Aaron. Aaron, you're muted.
So are we moving to 21?
Yes. And
okay.
I think it's also Hebrew.
All right. Well, who's reading
right,
this?
towns for the Levites.
Yeah.
Lilith, you reading this one?
Oh,
I don't think it's
okay.
bad,
I can
though.
magic spell it if you want.
Yeah, there's not too many.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's a lot.
I am the only person here Tomer has ever complimented on the correct pronunciation of a Jewish
Excuse me, I
word.
did that to Aaron as well.
Yeah, today.
Aaron said
for
Shechem
one thing.
so
moments
well.
ago.
He
Yes.
said Shechem so good.
Shechem? Yeah.
Shechem. Okay, read up to 22.
All right. Towns for the Levites, chapter 21.
No, actually, don't read up to 22 because it it corresponds with the.
19?
You know what? Fine.
Through 19?
Yeah, through 19 sounds fine.
Okay.
19. Fine. Or 22. You do 22. Fuck it. Oh. Yeah. Lilith?
Just had to do something.
Read up to 22. Fuck it.
Read up to 22 and fuck it.
That is that is some potty language, Tomer.
Yeah.
What
Always
would
my fault.
What would your parents think?
Yeah.
They were,
Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in with pasture lands for our livestock." So as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance. The first lot came out for the Kohathites, clan by clan. The Levites, who were descendants of Aaron the priest, were allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The rest of Kohath's descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. The descendants of Gershon were allotted 13 towns from the clans of the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half tribe of Manasseh in Bashan. The descendants of Merari, clan by clan, received 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the Israelites allotted to the Levites these towns and their pasture land as the Lord had commanded through Moses. From the tribes of Judah and Simeon, they allotted the following towns by name. These towns were assigned to the descendants of Aaron, who were from the Kohathite clans of the Levites, because the first lot fell to them. They gave them Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, with its surrounding pasture land in the hill country of Judah. Arba was the forefather of Anak. But the fields and villages around the city they had given to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his possession.
Yeah,
as his possession.
English.
Sorry. It's one of those cut line,
it is.
chopped up words. So to the descendants of Aaron, they gave the priest, they gave Hebron, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, Libnah, Jatir, Eshtemoa, Holon, Debir, Ain, Juttah, and Ben Shemesh, together with their pasture lands.
I should note that the translation that you have omits the and its pastures vet migrasha in every single city. So if you read the Hebrew Bible literally, it will be Yatir and with its pastures, Eshtamoa with its pastures, Holon with its pastures, Debir with its pastures. So
see, mine says Atin, Juttah, and Beth Shemesh together with their pasture lands, 9 towns from the 2
which
tribes.
is not accurate.
Okay,
well,
but it's faster.
Technically faster.
And it is technically saying the same thing. And from the tribe of Benjamin, they gave them Gibeon and Geba, Anathoth, and Almon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. All the towns for the priests, the descendants of Aaron, were 13, together with their pasture lands. Now, this is to 19 in mine.
Read up to 22. Or is it?
That's an awkward place to stop.
You know what? Okay. Stop there.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people that so the Levites are divided into 3 clans. Kohath, Merari, and what is it, Gershon? And then the priests, the descendants of Aaron, they are a subset of the Kohathites.
Kohathites.
Yeah, Kohathites. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
look at your little orange kitty.
And that it was important for them to inherit possess these lands or borrow, whatever you want to call that.
Well, remember, the Levites are the only ones who can perform any kind of priestly duty. So it's important to have them scattered around so they can steal from everyone universally.
Although it is interesting to point out that the priests, the descendants of Aaron, all their towns are in Judah and Benjamin, which is very close to Jerusalem. So this is for what's it called? Foreshadowing.
Do you want to read some comments first, Aaron?
Yeah, Doug says offers £10 and said, "Would slapping someone with a black pudding class as blood revenge?" And then Jason Unpasteurized says, there's a lot of reasons to enjoy this content, but I think my favorite is the live uncensored pussy.
Oh, what a good little pussy cat.
Yeah, I like the thing is like this was the same cat that kept like crawling up next to the fan and like above the like above the computer. So like he was in pretty dangerous territory. So I got like I felt really bad about doing it, but I feel like I had to just to train him. Got like a little spray bottle or whatever. So when he pulls that shit, I can be like, no, this is bad. Go away. So he's
orange though.
Yes, I understand.
It's not his turn with the brain cell.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. I only have 2 comments on the section that we read. I have 1 comment that overlaps from 9 to 42. So I'll read this when we'll finish the section. So I'll start with verses 1 to 3. Nelson comments, the system is linked into the overall narrative structure of Joshua by verses 1 to 3. Eleazar, Joshua, and the tribal head make up the same group who have appeared in 14:1 and 17:4 and 19:51. They will again be at Shiloh in 22:9. The plot is initiated by a request for land, the same situation as 14:12, 15:19, 17 verses 4 and 14. This seems to be a literary imitation of the land grant narrative genre, and 17:4 is likely to be the source of the language used in verses 2 to 3. An interest in the Levites has already been raised by 13:14, which is 33 in the MT, 14:4. 33 in the MT. Yeah. The text's allusion to a command of Moses and Yahweh is problematic if one excludes Numbers 35 verses 1 through 8 from consideration as a text dependent on this one. Perhaps this is an oblique reference to the command for cities of refuge in Deuteronomy 19 verses 1 through 8. And finally, 4 through 8, Galil comments, these verses describe the 3 main Levitical families who received the cities, Kohathites, Gershonites, and Merarites. The Merarites will get 12 cities, the Gershonites 13, and the Kohathites 23. The Aaronites will get 13 cities, while the remaining Kohathites only get 10 cities. This division of 4 groups was probably edited by the priestly writer of Joshua, and it is not original. In this division, the author wished to separate the priests, the Aaronites, and the remaining Levites, and with them the remaining Kohathites. The order of the tribes listed in these verses isn't similar to that of the tribes listed before, and it is possible to point to a clear dependence of the general quorum on the detailed quorum. The order in the detailed quorum is geographic, from south to north. After that, the northern tribes are listed, and finally, the rest of the Transjordanian tribes. In contrast, in the general quorum, the name of the eastern half Manasseh was copied and inserted after Naphtali, and Zebulun was inserted at the end of the list. These changes were edited based on literary structural reasons, and their dependency with the list given in the detailed quorum is revealed to all. That's it from a commentary on this part. I have a comment that's from 9 to 42, but we'll do that after we finish this chapter.
Fair enough. I mean, it's pretty clear, yeah, there's a lot of political reasoning that goes into certain things. And, wouldn't you know it, the priests descended of Aaron, who are the priests of the temple, who are leading the Yahwist, cult, are just the most important. And the first lot falls to them. I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you. All right. Should I continue, or does anyone else have anything? Yes. Okay.
Sorry, if anybody else has.
Well, I've got one more comment from Minute Rice. Haven't heard the dogs bark yet. Maybe giving voice to it will bring it about. You would have heard the dogs barking, except that I jumped to the mute button in time just seconds ago when they detected something outside. So,
we heard them, Arn. It worked.
Okay.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Well, those noble dogs saving us from birds and postmen and rattling breezes.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Lilith.
Verse 20. The rest of the Kohathite clans of the Levites were allotted towns from the tribe of Ephraim. In the hill country of Ephraim, they were given Shechem, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, and Gezer, Gibzaim. Kiftaim,
Kiftaim.
and Beth Horon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. Also from the tribe of Dan, they received Elteke, Gibeoth,
Elteke.
Elteke.
Yeah.
Gibbethon,
Gibbethon, yeah.
Aijalon,
Ayalon.
and Gath Rimon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the half tribe of Manasseh, they received Tanakh and Gath Rimon, together with their pasture lands, 2 towns. All these 10 towns and their pasture lands were given to the rest of the Kohathite clans. The Levite clans of the Gershonites were given from the half tribe of Manasseh, Golan in Bashan, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, and Be'eshtarath, together with their pasture lands, 2 towns. From the tribe of Issachar, Gishion, Dabarath, Yarmuth, and Enganim, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Asher, Mishal, Abdon, Helkath, and Rehob. Yeah, more phlegm. Together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Naphtali, Kedesh in Galilee, a city of refuge for one accused of murder. Hamoth, Dor, and Kartan, together with their pasture lands, 3 towns. All the towns of the Gershonite clans were 13, together with their pasture lands. The Merarite clans, the rest of the Levites, were given from the tribe of Zebulun, Yokanam, Kartath, Dimna, and Nalal, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Reuben, Bezer.
I see, Isaac. Yeah. Just a second. Yes. So the Sephariah doesn't have the verses. Lilith, please read 36 to 37 first.
Okay.
Then I'll address this.
From the tribe of Reuben, Bezer, Yahaz, Kedemoth, and Mephath, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Gad, Ramoth in Gilead, a city of refuge for one accused of murder. Mahanaim, Heshbon, and Jezer, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns in all. All the towns allotted to the Merarite clans, who were the rest of the Levites, were 12. The towns of the Levites in the territory held by the Israelites were 48 in all, together with their pasture lands. Each of these towns had pasture lands surrounding it. This was true for all of these towns. So I'm just going to finish. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Bullshit. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Everyone was fulfilled. And, next week we'll start on the long list of all the ways they failed and did not have peace on any side, but
Okay, so I should note this. Isaac's face was a bit bewildered on 36 to 37. The reason is that these verses are not found in the Masoretic text, but they are preserved in the Septuagint. And Kimchi actually testifies of some Hebrew manuscripts that include verses 36 to 37. And Nelson writes, the best MT witnesses show an ancient loss of verses 36 to 37 through haplography treated by the repetition of 4 cities. The loss was restored in some Hebrew witnesses by taking part of the corresponding text from Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 6, 63 to 64, which is 78 through 79 in the Old Testament. This is evidenced by the absence of the tagline, City of Refuge for the Killer, the elimination of which is characteristic of the Chronicles parallel, end quote. Butler notes that the omission makes the arithmetic of verse 41 incorrect. He writes that the Septuagint appears to give the earliest reading.
Yeah,
and also verse 40, right?
What?
In verse 40 it says 12 towns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Basically, it seems in this case, at least, that the Septuagint, being older, is more accurate and includes the full text, and that the Masoretic one had somehow dropped these.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably through haplography.
Yeah,
there's-
it happens.
There's also the issue of like it not even like mentioning those cities of refuge,
mhm.
which is really weird considering it just came after them in the
Yeah.
actual text. So it would be, I mean, I already said this before, like pretty like when we started like the whole distribution of the land stuff. But yeah, these would be just from a later stage in development. These chapters as entire editions.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how many differences there are between the Greek and the Masoretic text, like just all over the place.
Yes,
And the
especially in
thing
Russian.
is, like even in the Greek, there are also differences between like significant ones between the Septuagint versions. So like this is, let's see, yeah. So in
Ralph's.
19, yeah.
What's the earliest manuscript for the Septuagint that we have? Like 800, something like that?
Or that's their full codex, I think, Sinaiticus. But I don't know of like specific manuscripts of like portions. I think Sinaiticus is our oldest codex.
Oh no. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Codex
Apparently we have
Sinaiticus.
Apparently we have fragments of Leviticus and Deuteronomy from the
Right.
2nd century BCE.
Okay, yeah, fragments. All right, yeah. But also, yeah. So here, you can, you can tell this. This is technically legible. So this is just from Joshua 19. So I know it's not the chapter we're going over, but there is these columns right here. Like usually, this would just be the text itself.
That's
But
is that Alexandrinus and Vaticanus?
this is through A. So you see up top here, this says B, and this
Yeah, that's
says
Vaticanus
A. Yeah.
and Alexandrinus.
Yep. So these are the differences between them. These are the same verses on each of these sides.
Mhm.
But
We'll
they're
also see that in
significantly
Judges.
different where they had to put both down.
We'll see this in Judges, actually. The Net's translation also has two of the Vaticanus and Alexandrinus
Yeah.
into columns because they are very different. Not very, but they have differences.
And also you've got like the Sinai Codex.
Also,
like
Lucianic
Marcion or
recensions.
something?
Yeah, and also the Lucianic recensions as well.
I'm getting
But
confused.
the
It's
King
not called the
James is a
Marcion
perfect Bible.
Codex, is it?
Of
Is
course,
there another?
Mark. Yes.
Yes. It came from God directly to the totally gay king in Shakespearean English, and that's the end of it. It's interesting to see these differences and everything. But for me, given my angle on all of this, I'm just highlighting the end of this chapter for all of the long lists of convoluted names. Verses 43 to 45. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn, and no one was able to resist him, and they had peace on every side, and God kept all his promises. This, if ever someone asks you for a contradiction in the Bible, that verse against everything else in the fucking book. Everything. Because let me tell you, the rest of Joshua, the rest of Judges, Samuel, everything is about how none of this is true. They didn't get all the land promised. They had peace on no side at no time. Occasionally they were able to buy a little bit of it with, all the gold they could muster. And like, it's just the absolute unmitigated gall in the middle of a book about, if you read it literally, about how God never kept a single promise he made to these people, to throw in this line is just, it's gaslighting of the highest order. I cannot think of anything more absurd.
That's very true. And I also would like to point out that, and I don't know how you guys translate that very last bit on verse 43, the Hakalba, everything was fulfilled. So any Christian interpretation of any of the promises given to Abraham and etc., this puts an end to that. Like there is no other fulfillment, no other potential way of looking at this. This is it. I think that makes this pretty clear to me that Christianity is just incorrect.
Yeah, I think Hakol Bar is like an Israeli version of, and then everyone clapped because it means everyone came.
Nobody says that in Israel. Nobody says Hakol Bar. Just say.
That's making a joke. Because it literally means and everything came. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything was fulfilled. It's another way of saying it. Yes.
Yeah. So I'll start on
Well, hold
verses
on.
9.
Let me get a couple of comments knocked out here. Trevor and Wright says, were the Levite tribes the only tribe among Israel that ever had a right to the priesthood?
So more
Good question.
broadly, it would be like, you know, the Aaronids, right? But then the Levites were of course the big one. That I think they were, you know, part of the Aaronid line, right? So it was just like a specific.
No, it's the Aaronites
the Levite is the
are
tribe, and then Aaron is
within it.
Never mind. So yeah.
Yeah.
So,
remember
so you have
in Exodus they earned the priesthood by genociding people when they fucked up.
Classic.
Yeah, like in Jewish tradition, the Levites aren't priests. The Levites are like the musicians and the guards in the temple, and the priest, the descendants of Aaron, are a subclass of Levites that are the actual priests serving in the temple.
And then later on, there is the whole thing with like when the Zadokite priesthood tried to take over.
Eli.
Yeah, and they would have been a subset of Aaronites, I guess. And so I think it's possible that historically that there was, you know, the firstborns did, you know, household priestly duties, and then that extended to the local temples, and the Levites would have been a movement, so I guess, to become priestly, and then the priests wrestled control for the rest of the Levites at some point. I think that's probably what happened.
It's entirely possible. We have discussed the possibility that they retconned themselves as a tribe from this, you know, generation of
because they don't have a place, right?
Exactly. Originally come from the, you know, the firstborn sons, that they were then, no, we were a tribe, and our God is our inheritance. So we get the first goods of everything.
I mean, I've seen things. I don't know if there's any evidence for it, but I've seen things that people were like, oh, the Levites were the ones who were Egyptian, and they are the ones who did the Exodus, and they had the story, and then they, like, you know, retconned themselves into and said everyone was in Egypt, and you know, we were one of the tribes. And I don't know if there's any support for that idea, but
that sounds on the face of it ridiculous.
Yeah.
So
like the story of the Exodus is a memory of the Levites who came from.
It is possible.
You know, they were actually.
There's
no
evidence,
or
but it's possible that a couple of runaway slaves from Egypt had some sort of a story that made it into some sort of a myth that got, you know,
but the Midianite origin seems much more plausible.
Entirely possible it's made up.
Yeah. All right, I've got Eric Wander says, what tribe was Ajalon from?
Ayalon.
Can save you. 23-24 said 21-23-24 says it was from Dan, but First Chronicles 6:66. I know we're not in Chronicles. LOL says it was from Ephraim.
Well, they do have it mentioned in 19 verses 42 to 43 as a city in the territory of Dan. So.
Yeah, so I think that's what he's saying. So is it Dan or is it Ephraim? I think we can probably explain that with the whole.
Oh, sorry, I meant with
the land.
It's actually also wait.
If Dan abandoned their inheritance and went north,
in
then
verse
maybe
24,
Ephraim.
In verse 24, it's a Levitical city of the Kohathites. But I can't find something.
I mean, here's the thing you have to remember about Chronicles, right? So, they used the Deuteronomistic history as a source. It's pretty clear, and the big issue is it was more theologically oriented. So while the Deuteronomistic history is more historical, the other one is more of a theological history, I guess, or it's historical theology. I should put it that way. I think Francesco Stavrakopoulos put it that way. And the thing is, the stuff that is different in the writing of the Chronicles during the time had to be kind of accounted for, explained, because they did see some of these contradictions, and they also changed things in order to either see what they saw as mistakes, or see what they saw as contradictions, or see or what they saw as not theologically very good. They changed a lot of these things, and sometimes it's just very small things in lineage. Like I think like near the end of Chronicles, I forget if it's First or Second Chronicles, like in the Deuteronomic history, like some person is called like I think was it a father or an uncle, and then he becomes a cousin later. In Chronicles, I forget the name. It's like
maybe Othniel.
Maybe I forget the name. They all kind of get jumbled together in my brain.
Fair.
Yeah. So, but they're like it's a direct there's a direct kinship that is acknowledged, and then the chronicler just changes the kinship relation. So there are if you're gonna be comparing Chronicles and the Deuteronomic history, you're gonna run into a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. It's a matter of what is ideologically expedient at the time this person is writing versus at the time this person is writing. There's also the fact of history, and also it's something you'll run into with any sort of fundamentalist theologian of any kind. They will say the scripture says XYZ, and if you pick out a verse that actually says the opposite, they will always have an excuse for why it doesn't really mean what it says. It really means something else. And that's context, except that context appears to largely be pulled out of their ass. The truth of the matter is, whatever they may say, many times what they think the text should mean takes precedence over what the text actually says. And that the amount of double think and rewrites and stuff, it's just something I've observed in all religious thought, so-called, and it would be silly to assume that doesn't play a role in the history of how these things get stitched together too.
I think we should teach Christians that verse 666 was a later addition by Satan himself in order to corrupt the Bible. That therefore it's not a contradiction. Pretty sure. I'm pretty sure if we tell Christians, they're going to use it.
Yeah, the monster lady will.
I would say, to answer the question about this specific city, I think like whoever wrote that Dan had this territory in the south, if it was a polemic saying, oh, they abandoned it and went north, they could have chosen any cities in the south that they wanted, even if they were in other tribes, because the implication is that they were never actually settled by the Danites. So yeah, it's possible for the city to be both a Danite city, and then Ephraim took over that city after they left, or whatever happened, really.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. Verses 9 through 42, Dozeman comments, the aim of the Levitical cities is to clarify the hierarchy of the three Levitical families in decreasing order of importance, beginning with the Kohathites, verses 9 to 26, then the Gershonites, verses 27 to 33, and finally the Merarites, verses 34 to 40. The 6 cities of refuge are important to the distribution of the Levitical cities, with each Levitical family receiving 2. The inclusion of the cities of refuge within the Levitical cities follows the geographical progression from west to east, as in Joshua 20, reinforcing the central role of the land west of the Jordan over the more peripheral eastern territory. But the additional pattern in Joshua 20 of moving from the north to south is reversed in Joshua 21. The reversal allows for the most important Levitical family, the Kohathite Aaronite priests, to be identified with the southern city of Hebron in Judah, verse 11, as the first pairing of the cities of refuge with the Levitical families.
Wasn't Hebron the capital before David moved it to Jerusalem?
I think so.
Yeah?
I think it was, yes. But I think
right.
also
but the temple was in Shiloh.
Well, yeah, I can't say. I think it's all in Samuel. Okay, and finally,
wasn't Samaria? No, Samaria was the capital of Israel.
Yeah,
maybe I
can't say.
Yeah, Samaria is where the Dan and Beersheba, but the Jerusalem temple is a different.
Yeah, I mean we don't know. Like this is like the point where it becomes mythology into legend, and so we don't actually know. If David conquered Jerusalem.
Anything.
And yeah, so like if its original capital was in Hebron before it went to Jerusalem, this is
No,
like,
Saul had his court in Hebron, and that's where one of his
Ah.
sons went during his rebellion. And then
that's
David would have
interesting.
initially set up there and then did the whole thing with the taking of Jerusalem, because of course he did.
It's interesting to have a city of refuge be a royal city as well. I don't know if that means anything or not.
Oh.
And finally, on verses 43 to 45, Galil writes that this section was written by the Deuteronomistic author of Joshua. Its purpose is to emphasize that God's promise to give the Israelites all the land was fulfilled, which he swore to the patriarchs. The author does not indicate in what period was this promise fulfilled, but it is probable to assume that he points to the days of David and Solomon. Dozeman writes that the author of Joshua 20 to 21 has placed the statement of rest in the land at the end of Joshua 21 to link the Levitical cities more securely with the distribution of the tribal territory, Joshua 13 to 19, even though the two texts conflict in their vision of the tribal territories and in the leadership role of the Aaronite priesthood. Butler writes that this section is, quote, without a doubt a literary summary composed by the ultimate editor of the book in his favorite Deuteronomistic vocabulary, end quote.
Yeah, it's the myth of David's reign as a golden age, and Solomon is it's kind of it sort of gets the feel of like a King Arthur, back in the ancient legendary past of the great and noble king. Oh, if only he would come again, and blah blah blah. So it's it very much has that vibe.
Continue.
We finished it.
Tomer?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm done.
All right. I was expecting Tomer not to be finished with his commentary.
He just did.
All right. Dare we move on to 22?
Well, here's the thing with moving on to 22, and this is up to you guys entirely. So we could try to push through 22. There's probably quite a good amount of commentary on it, especially from the on the altar stuff. But then next week, if we do 22 this week, we're only gonna have 2 chapters. We're on 23 and
I would say that we should push 22 because 24 is I have a lot of commentary on 24. So
right, so you want
it's an
to
important
push through
chapter.
22 right now?
Yeah, I mean we have 1 hour.
Yeah, no worries.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so
Read up to
I'll be
12.
reading.
Sorry.
Did Mark read yet?
Mark,
I don't think he's
you want to
here.
read?
Mark?
I don't think he's here.
Yeah, I don't think
okay.
he's here.
I mean,
What happened? What happened to
he may have just slipped away to the bathroom. If we're here for 3
He had to run to a
hours,
city of-
presumably.
He had to go run to the city of refuge.
Oh no!
Yeah. The Avenger of Blood was after him.
Okay,
Read up to
so
12.
thank you. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, you have done what Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission that the Lord your God had given you. Now that the Lord your God has given them rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Then Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. To the half-tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given the land of Bashan. To the other half, the tribe, Joshua gave land to the west side of the Jordan, along with their fellow Israelites. When Joshua sent them home, he blessed them, saying, return to your homes with the great wealth, the large herds of livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and with great quantity of clothing, and divide the plunder from your enemies with your fellow Israelites. So the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh and Canaan and returned to Gilead, their own land, which they had acquired in accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. When they came to Galiloth, near the Jordan and the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built an altar on the border of Canaan and Galiloth near the Jordan at the Israeli side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. How dare you build an altar? So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar.
No, finish there.
What's that? Okay.
Yeah, finish there. Yeah.
Say what again?
I said finish there in verse 12.
Finish there. Well, I did. Okay. So you want me to read 13 and finish then?
No, just this is we're done with this section. That's what I wanted to say.
All right, go ahead.
This is crazy.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start on verses 1 through 6. Nelson comments, within the orbit of DH, Deuteronomy historian, verses 1 through 5 function as a minor transitional speech, a smaller version of those periodic orations at historical turning points through which DH communicates ideology, such as Joshua 23, next chapter, 1 Samuel 12, 2 Samuel 7, etc. This section is a natural next step after the DH summary of 21 verses 43 to 45, and a culmination of themes launched in 1 verses 12 to 18. The rest, quote-unquote, promised in 1, 13, and 15 and asserted in 21:44 becomes the occasion for the return of the eastern tribes in verse 4. Complete fulfillment of all promises, 21:45, leads to the actualization of Yahweh's commitment to this group, 1 verses 13 and 15, and Deuteronomy 3, 18 to 21. This transitional moment provided the DH with an opportunity to command compliance with the law of Moses in verse 5 and also 1 verses 7 through 8. These tribes are held up as examples of obedience in verses 2 to 3 and 1:17, who experience blessings, verses 4 and 6 and 1:13 and 15, in accordance with standard Deuteronomistic principles. In this way, Joshua's speech previews the themes of chapter 23, itself launched by the notion of rest in 23:1. On verses 7 through 8, Dozeman comments, the central role of the East and West Manasseh in verses 7 through 8 is judged by most interpreters to be unexpected and out of place in the narrative, the result of a late redaction or even a textual gloss. Two reasons are provided. One is that the late insertion of verses 7 through 8 is meant to provide a hinge, quote-unquote, to combine the once independent narratives of verses 1 through 6 and verses 9 through 34. This evaluation is seldom accompanied with a study of the specific motifs in verses 7 through 8, explaining how the text may be functioning as a literary bridge within the larger narrative. Another criterion is to judge Manasseh as a late insertion into a story about Reuben and Gad. This interpretation is often the springboard for complex views of redaction to account for all the references to Manasseh in Joshua 22, as illustrated, for example, in Balhern's identification of the Manasseh revision, quote-unquote. The conclusion conflicts, however, with the primary role of Manasseh throughout the book.
Yeah, this has been, there's quite a lot of debate about this chapter itself. Like, was this like a later addition from, maybe, some people have speculated that there's, that this entire chapter would have been like a later addition from the priestly source. And then other ideas are like, well, maybe like one of the Deuteronomistic authors had access to something that was P-like. There's a lot of debate around this. So what Tomer said about it being a springboard, yeah, it really is, because it's like around this time that we get back to the actual narrative, almost like we're slowly transitioning back into it. So like it's very clear that by like 23 we're back to whatever original text there was, but trying to unpack the textual history in this chapter has shown to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. It definitely has the feel of we're trying to address the bit about, before they hit Jericho, there were the tribes that were like, actually, we're good with this stuff. We already conquered on this side of the Jordan. Can we just stay here because we have space and we'd like space? And they were like, okay, but only if you send all your armies with us. And so, you know, you have to have the peace. So you have the excuse to send them back to their homes. It very much feels like there's this story was somewhat inserted and then they have to put the tie in here. And, you know, it's interesting to try and speculate about what, you know, political undercurrents were being addressed at various points of this being, you know, inserted, edited, redacted, yada, yada, yada. Unfortunately, there's many layers of that, and it's impossible to really definitively unweave them all.
Eric Wander says the sin is compared with two other sins, VD 17:20. The idolatry at Peor in the days of the wilderness wanderings, Numbers 25, and Achan's transgression of the ban on Jericho in Joshua 7.
Makes sense.
Okay.
And
Shall I
on this
continue
section,
reading?
I have one final comment on this section. On verse 10, an imposing altar. The Hebrew, it's Mizbeach Gadol Lemar'eh, literally an altar large for view. This altar was not intended for sacrifices, according to verse 26, but is used as a witness for the unity among the Israelites in verse 27. Nelson writes that the altar being huge-looking, quote-unquote, points forward to the rumor it will generate, and eventually to its role as a visual witness, quote-unquote. Nelson notes Assis's opinion that it may function as an attempt by the eastern tribes to persuade the western tribes of their aim to maintain unity. It may also underscore the cultic function of the altar. Dozeman also writes that the size and visibility of the altar means that it cannot be overlooked or ignored. It is intended to be public and permanent, and not as a private object for the eastern tribes.
Yeah, it's the violent reaction to the presumption that they're going to be sacrificing on this new altar does remind me of one of those really horrible things about religion, which is that nothing pisses off either God or the faithful more than someone worshiping God in just not quite exactly the right way. Like nothing you could possibly do is worse than worshiping God, but like a little bit wrong.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe I didn't pronounce every little syllable. Got it.
Yeah, well, obviously now you have to die and
Okay, so picking up from, what was it, 13?
Yes.
Okay, so the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, each the head of a family division among the Israelite clans. When they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now?" I guess we're going to have to discuss how this altar is an altar in rebellion against God?
it
Yeah,
doesn't.
that's
Yeah,
what kind of the whole thing is about.
like it wasn't
Right.
like established like you couldn't.
Right. How far do you want me to read this, Tomer?
Finish the chapter.
Okay. Was not the sin of Peor enough for us? Up to this very day, we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on the community of the Lord. And are you now turning away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel. If in the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land where the Lord's tabernacle stands and share the land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar for yourselves, other than the altar of the Lord our God. When Achan, son of Zerah, was unfaithful in regard to the devoted things, he did not wrath come upon the whole community of Israel? He was not the only one who died for his sin. Then Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, "The mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows. and let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion and disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you, the Reubenites and the Gadites. You have no share in the Lord. So your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. That is why we said, let us get ready and build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will be able to say to ours, you have no share in the Lord. I am confused.
Not say.
And
they won't be able. They won't say to us that.
They won't say to us. Where's that word? They will not be able to say. Okay, gotcha. And when we said, if they ever say to us or to our descendants, we will answer, look at the replica of the Lord's altar, which our ancestors built, not for burnt offerings and sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord and turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrifices, other than the altar of the Lord our God stands before his tabernacle. That stands before his tabernacle. When Phinehas, the priest, and the leaders of the community, the heads of the clans of the Israelites, heard what Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had to say, they were pleased. And Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, said to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is with us, because you have not been unfaithful to the Lord in this manner. Now you have rescued the Israelites from the Lord's hand. Then Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, and the leaders returned to Canaan from their meeting with the Reubenites and Gadites in Gilead, and reported to the Israelites. They were glad to hear the report and praised God. And they talked no more about going to war against them to devastate the country where the Reubenites and Gadites lived. And the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us that the Lord is God.
So, interesting stuff here. So just one thing for, well, actually two things. So verse 34, that the Reubenites and the Gadites called the altar witness. For they said it is a witness between us, that the Lord is God. But
it seems omitted.
Yeah, the Masoretic text omits it.
And I think it is omitted. I think,
yeah, I've got it here in brackets.
Right, yeah, which is interesting. But either way, this seems to me like something that or a text that would be written during either perhaps during an exile or afterwards. But the thing is, if you're trying to establish, well, like, listen, yeah, I have this other altar, but it's only a copy of like the real one. It's kind of like it's supposed to point towards the real one, essentially, in spirit. So once you can't worship at the temple, and people had to take their religious practice to other places and set up altars there, well, like, if during the time of the first temple it was very looked down upon, after the whole centralization thing, right, with Josiah, if it was very looked down upon to have these places of worship anywhere else, maybe you might write a story like this to be like, well, hold up, like any altar that we make is simply like a copy of the other one, of the real one.
I have to say, my impression is different because it's very much like, yeah, it's another altar, but they make a huge deal about how they're not actually going to use it for worship. They're not going to have the sacrifices or do any of the things. It does seem like a very, even if you live far off, you have made the deal, and it is great affront to God not to come and worship at the temple. So if you still have to do your worship by traveling to the temple, even if you're across the Jordan or whatever. So I don't know. possibly there's different layers to the story, both justifying the existence of at least religious symbolism elsewhere, but also reaffirming the necessity to ultimately return and do the practice in the temple the way it's meant to be. And if you don't actually ultimately work towards that goal, then you're breaking faith with God, and we have to slaughter you.
Right. Yeah.
Because,
Which is why the original temple is still would be in this case, right? The temple, right?
Still
The
shiny.
original one would have been kept in mind.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this story seems to be almost like a retcon of like, oh, these tribes, Reuben and Gad. Let's ignore Manasseh. It seems that their name seems to come and go. But Reuben and Gad, they've always been part of the 12 tribes, right? There was never a point where we absorbed them into our culture or anything like that. And they never worshipped this big altar that is standing over here by the Jordan. They built that as a replica. You know, like it seems like a mixture of what's that word again?
Retconning.
Explaining an existing structure.
Oh,
or something.
ideology.
Yeah, it seems like an ideology of there's a known altar looking thing, and they were like, they were never outside. They were always part of the group. Because it's literally like they're literally saying, "Oh, we did this so that your descendants won't say this," which implies that they did.
Yeah, very much, very much. I mean, Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia and always been allied with East Asia. And somebody got really mad when someone called the Bible the greatest piece of propaganda ever written. But I gotta say, they weren't wrong.
I see one comment. Maybe Aaron wants to read it first, and then my comment.
Okay, so Eric Wander says this chapter is often held to have an ancient core, but have been revised by both Deuteronomic and priestly writers. Do you guys agree with this statement by Martin Noth?
I don't know about the ancient core. Definitely don't agree with that part. It may have some connection with P literature, but it's hard to say on that one. So I disagree with one statement, and then I am undecided on the other one. But
in fairness, the conversation we just had would indicate that there would be both Deuteronomistic and priestly reasons to adapt this text in its context. So,
Yeah, I mean, hey, Noth was, he moved the ball forward, but it's not like he was on the mark. No one's quite there yet, right? There's still a lot of questions surrounding this stuff.
True. But at least we have a lot of, basis for our speculation as opposed to just, sounds like a squirrel, but I think the answer is Jesus.
Also, it's also crazy. I was going through the Blasphemers Bible playlist the other day. We're almost at 100 episodes.
Oh,
okay.
Nice.
No, it just it seems like this time around, for me reading it, it's going much faster than last time. Because last time it felt like fucking forever to get to 100 episodes, and then we ended up doing like 300. So yeah,
it helps when you read with friends.
Friends, quote unquote.
Oh, don't be like that. Yeah.
Genocide is better with friends, I swear we should rename this book Genocide, and it can still be boring.
Okay.
And magic
wait
rocks.
for judges.
Yeah, wait for judges. It's
When
gonna be
things
fun.
get real good.
Yep, it's gonna be fun. Okay, I'll start on verse 13. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, more accurately. Butler comments, Phinehas plays a unique role here, being the only leader besides Joshua to take the initiative in any action within the book. He is the son of Eleazar, who is on the inheritance commission with Joshua, as in 14:1, 19:51, and 21:1, but who never acts independently. Here, Phinehas takes center stage away from Joshua. Listen.
Okay.
The later tradition modified this by inserting Joshua into verse 34 in the Septuagint. Outside his birth in Exodus 6:25, Phinehas appears only in the Baal of Peor incident in Numbers 25. The resulting war against Midian, Numbers 31:6, and the note inserted into Judges 20:28. It is interesting to note that the tradition connects him here with Shiloh, in Judges 20, apparently with Bethel, and in Joshua 24:33 with Gibeah. I think it was mentioned before, so it's not. Maybe it's not assumed that he is dead. So. Okay, on verse 14, the Israelite clans, in Hebrew, Alfei Israel. The Hebrew Elef can mean thousands and is rendered as such by the Septuagint, which reads officers of thousands of Israel, and by the KJV. Commentators generally take it to mean clans here, and the Vulgate omits the second part of the verse. On verse 17, up to this very day we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin. Zakovitch comments, sin requires purification, according to Leviticus 16, verses 19 and 30. According to the viewpoint of this writing, which doesn't fit with what is told in Numbers 25:13, the sin still resides in the Israelites, and now the tribes of the Transjordan add additional guilt. This notion is of collective guilt. The Transjordan tribes sinned, but the guilt will reside in all the Israelites. This collective guilt notion, in the case of Baal Peor, was not to the satisfaction of the author of Deuteronomy, who writes in Deuteronomy 4:3-4, quote, "You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor, while you, who held fast to the Lord your God, are all alive today." Quote. On verse 18, Butler comments, the prosecution predicts the results of the crime. Divine anger on the entire community, compare Joshua 9:20 and Deuteronomy 29:27, 28 in Old Testament. Ketzef, which means wrath or anger in verbal form, is used for divine anger in a majority of the cases, particularly in Deuteronomistic and priestly circles. Human sin and rebellion rouse the divine wrath. The responsibility of the community for its members and the sense of unity within the community mean that the sin by a part brings punishment on the whole. At this point, the prosecution appears to testify that East and West are both part of the Yahweh community. On verse 19, if the land you possess is defiled, Ahituv comments, the delegation understood that by building the altar on the east side of the Jordan, the Transjordanian tribes revealed their opinion that their land of possession was defiled. Thus, the delegation proposed to, quote, cross over into the land of the Lord's holding where the tabernacle of the Lord asides and acquire holding among us, end quote. There is no confirmation of the delegation's understanding from the answer of the Transjordanian people, and the connection between building the altar and the Transjordan's defilement is very loose. Some interpret the delegation's sayings regarding the Transjordan defilement with their assumption that the altar's purpose was to sanctify the Transjordan ground. This interpretation assumes that the altar was on the east bank of the Jordan. Apart from the doubt of this location, it is impossible to understand how building an altar on defiled ground can sanctify it. The people rejected this option by saying that this would not succeed in the hands of the Transjordanian tribes, since there is no valid altar besides the altar of God. But how can this be interpreted as such, since the altar was at the west bank of the Jordan in verse 11, in the land of the Israelites? On that same verse, by building an altar for yourselves other than the altar of the Lord our God. Zakovitch comments, in this verse, the author repeats and characterizes their acts as rebellious, because here we find out why the building of the altar is regarded as sinful. The altar was built on impure ground, and it is competing with the altar of God at the sanctuary. With the problem of establishing an altar on impure ground, Naaman the Aramean sought to deal with it, taking with him some earth from the land of Israel, which is considered holy to Aram, according to 2 Kings 5:17. On verse 20, about Achan, Nelson writes that the example of Achan emphasizes the point that rebellion by any one group of the community signifies rebellion on the part of the whole people. Dozeman writes that the accusation is grounded in the concept of pan-Israelite identity. By building the altar, the eastern tribes threatened divine wrath not just against themselves, but also against all of the 12 tribes. On verse 22, the mighty one God the Lord, in Hebrew, El Elohim Yehovah. Rashi, oh, sorry?
Yeah, this is something I wanted to know about. Yeah, go for
Okay,
it.
so Rashi wrote that the repetition emphasizes that God is both in this world and the world to come. Kara wrote that this is a response to two charges, rebellion and sacrilege. Kimchi writes that this is repeated to emphasize and strengthen their point. This expression is also found in Psalms 51. Dozeman notes that Ald interprets the inner biblical reference as a call upon God to judge the accusation against them. He also adds that this may refer to the central theophany at the Jordan, where Yahweh was revealed as El the Living in the crossing in 310. Ahituv connected with the declaration of the people on Mount Carmel, Yahweh is the God, repeated twice in 1 Kings 18:39. On verse 24, we did it for fear, etc. Butler comments, the accused state their case in a form that seeks to appease their accusers by justifying their actions and the motives behind them. They were motivated by de'aga, which means anxiety or concern over the current state of affairs. This is stated in terms of the younger generation and future possibilities. It reflects present anxiety. The relationship between the different groups in Israel was not one of trust. Rather, the East Jordan group felt threatened with expulsion from the communal worship of Yahweh and from the community who worshipped him. On that same verse, someday your descendants might say to ours. Dozeman notes that the motif of intergenerational education is the form of a catechism, is prominent in Deuteronomistic literature, seen in Exodus 12:21-27, 13:11-16, and Deuteronomy 6:4-25. On verse 25, so your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. Zakovitch comments, the Western Transjordanian tribes have the power to prevent the Eastern Transjordanian tribes from practicing in the work of the Lord, seen in 2 Kings 17, verses 35-37, and Jonah 1:9. The Transjordanian tribes admit, therefore, that God's worship should not be held except to the west of the Jordan. But there must be found a way to remind the next generations that they too, living outside the holy ground, are entitled to practice in God's worship with the citizens of the land of Canaan. The concept expressed here is similar to that which David expresses in 1 Samuel 26:19, quote, for they have driven me out today so that I cannot have a share in the Lord's possession, but am told, go to worship other gods, end quote. The delegation accused the Eastern Transjordanian tribes of a sin equivalent to idolatry, but these answer that it was the people of Canaan who might have forced them to worship idols, had they not prevented it and built the altar, as they will explain. On verse 28, the replica of the Lord's altar. In Hebrew, Tavnit Mizbeach Yehovah. The word Tavnit can mean image or likeness. Dozeman writes that Tavnit may describe architectural plans in general, according to 1 Chronicles 28:19. But in the Pentateuch, its use is limited to sanctuaries and cultic practice. Deuteronomy condemns copies, quote unquote, of humans and animals, according to Deuteronomy 4:16-18. This, however, does not fit the justification of the altar in this chapter. The priestly literature describes the sanctuary in a positive manner, as a copy, quote unquote, shown to Moses, which models God's heavenly home, according to Exodus 25:8-9. He writes that a copy of the altar of Yahweh may introduce degrees of divine presence between the central sanctuary, where sacrifices take place, and the eastern altar, where no sacrifices take place. He further writes, the identification of the Eastern altar as a copy, quote unquote, highlights the separation between homeland and diaspora, and the influence of geography on the distinct quality of divine presence in the West and in the East. The presence of the deity resides at the central cultic site on Mount Ebal, where sacrifices take place, 8 verses 30-35. This presence animates the Western land, making it, quote, the territory of Yahweh, end quote, in 8:19. The eastern altar, as a copy of the altar of Yahweh, represents a different quality of divine presence in the polluted land east of the Jordan River. Cynthia Edinburgh captures the distinction, writing, quote, "Diaspora cult symbols could only serve as a memorial by which to remember their cultic religious ties with Yehud Samaria," end quote. On verse 30, Manasseh, while previously described as the half-tribe of Manasseh, now the reference is to the whole tribe. Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta read the half-tribe of Manasseh. Ahituv writes that the reference is to the half-tribe of Manasseh in East Transjordan. Butler writes that the reading of the Septuagint shows, quote, "the fluctuation in the transmission of the text," end quote. On verses 32 to 34, these verses do not mention the Manassites, which Butler describes as surprising. And the Septuagint corrects it by adding the half-tribe of Manasseh. And finally, on verse 34, the verse in the Hebrew Bible does not state the name of the altar, but according to the Vulgate, Peshitta, and a few Hebrew manuscripts, the name of the altar was Ed, witness. Rashi, Kara, and Ditrani wrote that this is a shortened verse, and the word Ed should be added. Kimchi attests to a version of Targum Jonathan that calls the altar Sahid, witness in Aramaic. Ibn Kaspi proposed that the name was omitted because it was long. Zakovitch proposed that the original name of the altar was Gilead, much like the Mount of Stones described in Genesis 31:48. And like the story here, the mount in Genesis was used to settle a conflict between the residents of Transjordan and Cisjordan. He also proposed that the name of the altar was omitted on purpose by a reader who wished to avoid confusion and embarrassment that might arise from the two traditions regarding the name of the mound. Nelson writes that perhaps the whole of verse 34b is supposed to be the name. Butler notes the opinion of Noth and Sojin that the name was scandalous, and of Barthélemy, who writes that an editor has removed the name of the altar as offensive. According to the Septuagint, Joshua named the altar. That's
so. Just for clarification, the name of the altar was Ed.
Yeah, in Hebrew, I should clarify, which means witness.
Did they call it Eddie for short?
No.
Or in familiar? Okay.
Yeah, it's possibly aid or key aid, which
Aid.
is another. Yeah, if the word isn't missing, then you could argue that key aid is the or aid, is the
Okay.
is the actual name as well.
Okay. So then next week we will be doing Joshua 20. What?
I think we can do 23. It's only 14
No,
verses.
but don't we want to do 23 and 24 next week?
Yeah, let's do 23 and 24 together.
We could.
Because it's Joshua's,
but
Joshua only gets to die once. It's not Moses here.
You know what? Fine. Whatever you choose.
Lawrence wanted to do these together. Well, no. Here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? Because if looking at yes, okay. So Joshua 24 is obviously important, but I don't think we're gonna have enough commentary on all of it for the whole show because it's not super long. Is the thing.
I will say that mine's is the longest, I think, in Judges and Joshua.
I think 23 and 24 will fit into 3 hours.
Yeah, especially since 23 isn't that long either.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, fine.
We'll go ahead and we'll do what we're doing 23 then next week.
Yeah.
Sure.
23 and 24.
Very good. I will make my notes for that. Thank you all for showing up. Mark, I want to talk to you when we're not recording anymore. But anyway, so hang on for a moment, would you? Okay.
All right.
We all good?
Yeah. Join the Discord.
Yeah, join the Discord as well.
See you all next week. Love you. Try not to commit any genocide.
Bye. See you in the Discord.